Thank you all for joining us today for our webinar. This is about the Conservancy's properties. We own 41 places that we care for and make available to the public. And so we have our stewardship staff joining us today to talk to us about those places and the work they do on them, and to tell us more about these places that you all are all welcome to get out and explore and visit. I'm Tom Saunders. I'm President and CEO of the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, and we appreciate you joining us for this. While mostly the pandemic has been nothing but complicated, one small silver lining of it has been that so many people are getting out and hiking and walking and exploring places that they haven't been before. And I know we've seen that people are using and exploring our properties more than ever before. And also that people are out on them who aren't the usual ones, you know, people who haven't done a lot of hiking or walking outside before, or suddenly looking for properties. So to respond to that, we have been working in ours really more than ever. And we have a campaign underway through the end of October that we're calling 41 Places, which refers to the fact that we have 41 preserves around Western Pennsylvania, and care for them and make them available to the public. They're places with trails and boardwalks and that are really set up for people to explore on the whole. And so I'd like to introduce our stewardship staff today, who are going to tell us about these properties. And Andy, I know you're going to kick us off, so I'll introduce Andy Zadnik, who runs all our stewardship work at the Conservancy.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you all for tuning in this afternoon. We hope you'll enjoy the information we're going to share with you. If you have any questions, please place them in the Q&A feature, and we'll get to as many of them as we can near the end of the webinar. Also, just so you're aware, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website, waterlandlife.org, in a few days, and we'll send you an email when it's available. So thanks to the generosity of many of you, our members and supporters, we've been fortunate to conserve large areas across Western PA. Much of this land has been transferred to the state or the federal government as state forest, state park, game land, or national forest. However, like Tom said, we continue to own quite a bit of land. It's currently over 13,800 acres across at least 41 different preserves. And the map in front of you shows the preserves in red. And as you can see, they're clustered in some of their core focus areas. Up here in the northwestern corner of the state, primarily in the French Creek drainage. Over here in the Clarion River area, and then crossing over into the west branch of the Susquehanna watershed. Of course, in the Pittsburgh area, down in the Laurel Highlands, associated primarily with Falling Water and Bear Run Reserve, as well as along the Great Allegheny Passage Trail, and down here in the Potomac drainage. It's a Seidling Hill Creek down here. In addition to the land that we own outright, we have conservation easements. We hold easements over more than 40,000 acres, and that's shown in the purple on your map. And we also actually hold subsurface rights, oil, gas, and or mineral rights on about 13,700 acres. And that's primarily underneath state land and the national forest. Now, this is the introduction to our stewardship team. There are currently 4 of us. I'm there in the upper right-hand corner. In the upper left is Tyson Johnston and his field assistant. Tyson covers basically everything north of I-80 and into the northwestern corner of the state, and then out to about Jefferson County, Forest County area. I actually cover everything south of I-80 and then east till about Westmoreland County. In the lower left, there is Amelia Marin. Amelia is the newest member of our stewardship team. She covers the Laurel Highlands, hardly insignificant, with Bear Run Nature Reserve, our largest preserve, as well as all of our conservation easement properties up through the through the Ligonier Valley, and then out into the Juniata and Potomac region. Matt Maruziak is in the lower right. Matt covers the PA Wilds area, the West Branch of Susquehanna, and then actually way out into Lycoming County, Bradford County, and even Sullivan County, PA. The land stewardship team is responsible for monitoring all of our properties at least once a year and for managing the preserves that we own. Management can entail everything from marking the boundaries to developing and managing trails, controlling exotic invasive species, and restoring natural communities. We couldn't do much of this work without the help of our land stewardship volunteers, as you can see here. Whether it's a somewhat soggy day up at Lake Pleasant planting trees, or a downright rainy day of pulling garlic mustard at Wolf Creek Narrows, we're grateful for all that our volunteers do, and we're always looking for more help. We'll talk about how you can get involved later on in the webinar. Of course, for larger projects like these structure removals up at Wattsburg Fen, Erie County, we have to hire professional contractors. All of our preserves are open to the public for low impact recreation, hiking, fishing, hunting, wildlife watching. We also encourage educational events and scientific research. Our management goals vary according to the preserve's conservation values, as well as our own capacity to implement projects. While most preserves, such as Dutch Hill Forest, which is what this image of is, this is in Jefferson County, most of our preserves are essentially undeveloped without designated parking or trail systems. Others, like Bear Run Nature Reserve, are certainly well developed with parking lots, signs, and designated trails. In fact, at Bear Run, we have our most extensive trail system. We have over 28 miles of trail at Bear Run, and they're divided into well-defined loops and well marked along the trail as well to make it easier to get around. Bear Run also has designated backcountry campsites, which can be reserved on our website. Of course, our preserves are by no means state parks, so we encourage you to familiarize yourself with the preserve and grab a map if possible before heading out. I'm now going to talk about several of our preserves that you may or may not be that familiar with. The first is Lake Pleasant Conservation Area. This is up in Erie County. It's just about 20 minutes south of the city of Erie itself. It's located close to Wattsburg and Waterford. Lake Pleasant is a true gem for Northwest PA. The lake itself is one of just a handful of natural inland lakes in the region, and the conservation area contains over 580 acres, which includes most of the lake's shoreline. Lake Pleasant is referred to as a kettle lake, and you can see that in this image. It formed during the last ice age, when a giant block of ice broke off of the receding glacier. As the ice continued to melt, the deposits of dirt and gravel were left in the surrounding valley. Today, the lake is fed primarily by groundwater percolating through the remaining gravel deposits. This gravel includes a lot of calcium-rich limestone, which helps to buffer the effects of acid rain and provides those conditions, very, very unique conditions that support many rare plant species. Another little bit of prehistory. In 1991, the skeleton of a woolly mammoth was discovered in the bottom of Lake Pleasant. In fact, these remains actually perhaps showed evidence of actually being butchered by humans. The remains of this animal are actually now in storage at the State Museum in Harrisburg. Now, a little more recently than the Pleistocene, just about 110 years ago, Lake Pleasant was actually a bit of a resort and amusement destination, complete with a toboggan slide, as you can see on the left, a dance hall, a baseball field, and a concession stand, and even a hotel. These photos are circa 1906. Then, fast forward to the 1940s, pretty much the 40s through the 80s, a private social club operated from a lot of the same buildings. Like our other preserves, we manage Lake Pleasant for low-impact recreation, education, and scientific research. Several years ago, we installed this accessible dock and kayak launch. By Fish and Boat Commission regulations, motors are not permitted in Lake Pleasant, so it's an ideal place for paddling, canoe, kayak, paddleboard, or rowboat. Here you can see Tyson launching from the accessible kayak launch. And while certainly there's some interesting history behind the structures, maintaining them really isn't part of our long-term goals for conserving the natural features of the lake. We're currently working to remove the derelict structures and some of these old dumps that we found. We're also working to restore sections of eroded shoreline. Here is a before shot and an after shot of a project we undertook in 2013. We hope to work on additional sections of shoreline over the next few years, and as possible, we'll try to incorporate access improvements such as boardwalks. The next preserve I'll talk about is Wolf Creek Narrows Natural Area in Butler County. Most of you have probably been to Wolf Creek Narrows in the early spring to see the display of wildflowers. If you haven't, mark your calendars now for about that first week in May. Here are a couple of the views of the wildflowers, some bluebells and Dutchman's breeches. To maintain this wildflower richness and support associated wildlife species like the West Virginia white butterfly, one of our primary management goals at Wolf Creek is controlling invasive species, particularly garlic mustard. In fact, this is the only preserve where we've been able to maintain a consistent removal effort over the years, and we'd like to think that the work is paying off. With Wolf Creek Narrows being so popular, especially in the spring, it's not unusual for the existing parking lot, which is actually on Slippery Rock University property, to overflow. We're now working to construct a new parking lot on Conservancy land, as well as a half-mile spur trail that will connect with the existing trail loop. This photo shows where the parking area will go, and you can see the trailhead in the background. The trail will go through some old fields into the wood line that you see in the back, and then connect with the existing trail. All of this is mowed now, so you're welcome to use it. Here's a view of some of those fields which we planted with native wildflowers and grasses. Now off that same exit as Wolf Creek, but heading in the other direction just into Lawrence County, is a lesser known preserve called Plain Grove Fens. Plain Grove Fens natural area is almost 400 acres and includes a mid-sized stream, very mature forest, and about 50 acres that we lease to a farmer for sustainable agriculture. Those are the leased areas are the hatched areas. This is Taylor Run. This is the stream that goes through the eastern part of the preserve. Here's a shot of those very nice, mature, deciduous forest. From the parking area, we maintain a mowed path along the edge of some of the leased fields and then on into the woods that you see here in the background. The current trail ends at an old field that we're actually working to restore back to forest. A few years ago, we planted about 5 acres of trees and shrubs in this field. Future plans for Plain Grove include improving this parking area, maybe adding some interpretive signage, as well as possibly extending that trail further into the property and maybe even creating a trail loop. The last preserve I'll talk about is much closer to Pittsburgh. This is Tom's Run Nature Reserve over in Kilbuck in Ohio Townships, right very close to where I-79 crosses the Ohio River. Part of Tom's Run is actually part of the old Dixmont Hospital site. Here, this is a topo map showing Tom's Run with our new trail loop. Tom's Run features a very nice American beech maple forest, as well as a drier, more of a scrub forest located higher up on the property where, as I understand it, there had been plans to build a golf course years ago. This part of the property is very interesting and has It provides habitat for the Allegheny mound builder ant. And like I said, over the last few years, we've completed some significant access improvements, including a 3.5-mile trail loop and a new parking lot, as well as we've installed some signage. The trail was designed to have minimal impact and be sustainably maintained. Much of the trail work was done by our volunteers, like these students from Robert Morris University. As part of our work, we've removed a lot of structures off the property as well, but maintained, we decided to keep this old stone foundation just as a reminder of the past use of the property. I think of Tom's Run as kind of that nice example of balancing public access, which we want to encourage, as well as protecting those resources, those natural resources. And I'm really excited to see, now that we have the parking lot and the trail, that we're seeing families in small groups going out to use Tom's Run, which is exactly what we want. So I'm going to turn over this session to Tyson, who's going to talk about one of our preserves up in Erie County called West Branch French Creek. And I'm going to mute myself.
Thanks, Andy. Next. So our West Branch French Creek Conservation Area is located in Erie County near Wattsburg, so not too far away from our Lake Pleasant Conservation Area that Andy just spoke about. Our first acquisition there occurred in 1996, and the most recent addition to the preserve was in 2019. It currently stands at just under 1,000 acres at 992. Next. This close-up map shows two main waterways. Flowing from north to south, we see the West Branch of French Creek, and then from west to east, we have Alder Brook, one of the tributaries. Paddling is possible on sections of the West Branch of French Creek, although you may encounter some blowdowns as you proceed through. Next. The preserve currently contains about 6 miles of frontage on the West Branch of French Creek. French Creek is documented as having the highest level of aquatic biodiversity of any stream of its size in Pennsylvania and all states to the northeast of Pennsylvania. French Creek and its tributaries provide habitat for 5 species of federally endangered and threatened freshwater mussels and other mussel species, as well as numerous fish species of greatest conservation need in Pennsylvania. Next. The headwaters of French Creek are in southwestern New York, just west of Chautauqua Lake. The entire watershed covers about 1,250 square miles or 790,000 acres. The main branch of French Creek enters the Allegheny River in Franklin in Venango County, which is where our Northwest Regional Office is in Franklin, where I am today. Next. So we'll take a tour around our West Branch French Creek Conservation Area from north to south, looking at some of the stewardship work that has occurred there during our ownership. Next. All of the parcels on the preserve are contiguous, except for one, the one we see here on the map. This northernmost parcel stands alone for now, about 1.5 miles upstream of the rest. Next. This parcel was historically used for agriculture. Since the Conservancy's acquisition, sensitive areas were retired from ag use and are being reforested. Currently, a portion of the parcel is used for rotational grazing of sheep and cows by a local farmer. Public access is permitted on this parcel outside of the pasture area. Next. Volunteers and staff have worked here to clean up an old dump site on the property and plant native trees and shrubs. Next. Professionals were hired to remove the old farmhouse, which was in poor condition, and restore that former home site. We were able to salvage many of the old foundation stones and the utility poles for use on another portion of this preserve and on other preserves in the region as well. Next. Moving south to the contiguous portion of the preserve, we have continued with our theme of cleaning up and restoring the land. In this case, native trees and shrubs were planted in an old field within the West Branch French Creek floodplain. Next. Managing invasive species is a continuous battle on all of our preserves. A portion of this preserve was an old gravel pit, and that open area that was left behind is vulnerable to the establishment of invasive plants. So the dead clumps of shrubs in the photo are multiflora rose and bush honeysuckles that were treated with herbicides by a professional contractor. Next. Contributions from members like you can help us keep invasive species at bay here and on our other preserves. Next. A 1.1 mile hiking trail on a portion of the preserve takes visitors along a beaver pond, around an old Christmas tree plantation, and through a floodplain forest. Staff and volunteers work year-round to help keep this trail clear for visitors. Next. Here's a late winter shot showing a portion of the trail. Notice on the left side, the Christmas tree plantation, and on the right side, the silver birch trees. Next. And here's a summer view of the beaver pond that you would see on the hiking trail. Next. So the portion of the trail along the beaver pond is wet, and so our staff and volunteers have constructed a primitive boardwalk there, made with naturally rot-resistant timbers. Next. The round logs beneath the planks are locust, and those were donated by a conservancy member. We cut and peeled the bark off of those logs and attached them to 2-inch thick larch planks, which were milled at an Amish sawmill in Crawford County. Next. Here we see our intern in the summer of 2017 peeling the bark off of those locust logs. And believe it or not, it was a challenging task in that there was a lot of logs to process, but the bark did come off rather easily. Next. And here is the main office for our beaver dam manager and her family. Next. The preserve contains a unique wetland community called a fen that supports many rare plant species. In 2010, that area was designated by the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources as a wild plant sanctuary. So this state program recognizes private landowners who conserve rare native plants and ecological communities. And it allows DCNR staff to provide guidance to landowners on how to manage those special places. Next. Unfortunately, several other parcels that comprise this preserve also had historic dump sites on them. And we worked to clean those up after we acquired them. And again, the assistance of our volunteers makes this sometimes daunting task possible. Next. It sometimes can be like opening a time capsule when you peel away the layers of debris and you never know what will become uncovered. Next. Equipment can make the task so much easier in some locations. Next. And sometimes in those layers of debris, we find a reward like this spotted salamander. Next. To make this preserve more accessible and attractive, a picnic shelter with tables and grills is available to anyone to use on a first-come, first-served basis. Next. An accessible parking area and pathway with an informational kiosk greets visitors at the main access point on Route 8. Next. One of the more urgent needs at this site is funding for the replacement of a failing retaining wall between the parking lot and in the picnic pavilion along the ADA pathway. Next. Our proposed plan calls for completely removing the existing plate retaining wall and regrading the land around the parking lot so that a new retaining wall is not needed. That will reduce future maintenance needs and keep costs down. Next. As the preserve has grown, we have added additional access points with off-road parking. The boulders that you see here in the background are used to keep vehicles from going beyond the parking area. And those boulders are actually some of the foundation stones that we salvaged from the home that we raised on the northern portion of the preserve. Next. On behalf of our stewardship team, I sincerely thank you for your contributions that have allowed us to steward these special places. And now Matt Maruziak is going to talk about one of the special places in his region. Matt?
All right, thanks, Tyson. So yeah, we'll be talking about Better Branch Forest. You can go to the next, please. So just orient you here, we're a little bit further east now. We're in Elk County, in the southern eastern portion of Elk County. Just a little bit northeast of DuBois, southeast of Ridgeway, St. Mary's. I'm in Ridgeway is where I'm sitting at, due east of Brockway. If you want to go to the next. So this shows the overall property. This is about 1,500 acres. We acquired this property in 2008. It was an acquisition. In fact, the total acquisition was about 5,400 acres that we acquired as part of one of our 75th anniversary acquisitions. 3,900 acres was south of Route 255 that we conveyed to the Managed State Forest, but we retained this 1,500 acres for a couple of reasons. We wanted to provide recreation, and you can see how now we have a designated trailhead and some parking. We wanted to demonstrate sustainable forestry, and we wanted to remediate past mining impacts. So to orient you on this property a little bit more, you can see Cherry Run drains through the eastern portion of the property, and that is a tributary into the Bennett branch of the Cimmahoney Creek, which of course is a tributary into the west branch of Susquehanna. So we are in it. So this is the Chesapeake drainage that we're talking about now, and we can talk a long time about the impacts of the Bennett branch because of mining impacts. It has had a lot of acid mine drainage, and Cherry Run was part of that problem that we'll be talking about how we had fixed that. So really, I'm going to be starting on the eastern side to talk about the mining impacts. So I'll talk about the impact and then talk about how we remediated it. I do want to note on this public use map, you don't see any parking on the eastern side yet. That's because when we made this map, a lot of that reclamation was ongoing and we weren't encouraging people to use it. But now that reclamation is done, so we will be updating this map. And as you can see, it's easy to access that. If you're up this way, feel free to stop by. You can take Pine Avenue, which from the town of Forest, and take that whole way back to a big parking area into the property and explore. Part of our goals with our stewardship campaign is to improve the parking area here and provide more interpretive sign and get this map updated, because this is going to be a really cool area to explore. And as you may know, we are in elk country, so you may actually see elk on this property as well. Next. So first we'll go talking about, this property after the original forest was taken off, this property was really managed for coal extraction for probably nearly 100 years. This is the village of Cardiff, which was in the middle of the property at one time. And this village was established probably in the 1890s as a coal mining town. Next. And this was what underlaid that town in our property. Cardiff was kind of in the middle. Cherry Run is at the southern part of the map there. And this shows all the mine tunnels that occurred on the property, all the deep mining that went on. In fact, there'd be stories where folks from the village of Burndale, which is to the northwest, these folks could actually come to Cardiff underground through the tunnels. So initially, the coal extraction occurred through deep mining, which is, as you know, you folks from southwestern Pennsylvania are very familiar with that. And of course, once the coal was removed, these mines would then fill up with water. So this was one of the first impacts of the property, that as these mines filled up with water, there was also residual in the mines were sulfur-bearing rocks, particularly pyrite, which when pyrite and these sulfur-bearing rocks get exposed to air and water, it reacts with them to form sulfuric acid and iron oxide. So this mine water then became very acidic, became laden with iron oxide, and then because it was so acidic, it was also starting to pick up other or dissolve other minerals in the soil, such as aluminum and magnesium. And the water from these mines also need to get discharged somewhere, else you might have a blowout. So our property actually had 2 mine discharges that came in right where the village of Cardiff used to be. Next. Thanks. So this is what we call the K2 discharge. You can see on the upper right where it's actually coming out of the ground, and the orange is the iron oxide. It's part of it, as well as the water is very acidic. On the bottom left, this is the same discharge a little bit further down. You can see it's whiter. That's the aluminum. There was dissolved aluminum in the water, and now some of it's starting to come out as aluminum oxide. You can also see a weir at the bottom of it, and that's a flow measurement device that we have had on the discharges. Next. This is a K1 discharge. This is coming out on the other side of the hill. Again, similarly coming out very acidic, a lot of iron, other dissolved metals. You can also see the weir on it that we're using to measure the flow rate. So how do you deal with this? How do you treat this? Well, first of all, with these weirs, the reason we have these weirs here is we collected flow data for over a year to understand just how much water is coming out. Of course, to design a system, you need to know how much it is, as well as took chemistry data of what kind of chemistry the water was. But the treatment, from a chemical standpoint, it's not difficult, although it could be expensive. So basically how you treat acidic acid mine drainage is first you have to add alkalinity. That will increase your pH. And once you do that, these dissolved metals, these metals in solution, would precipitate out as metal oxides. So the second step is you need a place for the metals to drop out. And then at that point, the water can get cleaned up and now you have clean, neutralized water going back into your stream. Next. So this shows the discharge systems we have now installed in the system. So again, running through that system, if we start with our K2 discharge, which is up on the upper left there, that discharge is now buried and it's piped into a limestone bed. And there's a PVC distribution pipe that distributes across that bed and gives good contact to add the alkalinity to the water. So that's where the water is getting neutralized and getting a lot of alkalinity added to it. And then from that bed, it gets piped again underground to a settling pond. And that's the point where any this metal oxides will not precipitate out the iron oxide, aluminum oxide, magnesium oxides. That's where the metals begin to participate out. And then the third pond, it goes through a finishing pond, and that's basically a vegetative wetland that acts like a filter to filter out any remaining residual metals or any other contaminants before it gets discharged to the river, to the creek. Similarly, the K2 discharge, which is coming out at the bottom right of the photo there, that discharge is now buried and is piped into the 2 limestone beds. That was a larger discharge, so we actually had to require 2 parallel beds. And then from those limestone beds, that goes off the pitcher to their settling ponds. So this then treats the water. This project was a lot of years in the making, and we worked closely with our watershed staff to get this done. Mark Hiller and Eli Long were incredible in getting the funding and getting this project complete. Now that this project is done, these acid mine drainages are now treated. It's been in place for about a year now, and now the water going into Cherry Run is no longer impacting it, and we're starting to see life come back to Cherry Run. Next. I was up on the property checking things out early in August, and I thought I should do a little assessment of Cherry Run while I was there. And this is actually below where these discharges come in, and we're certainly finding brook trout. These are not the biggest trout I caught this year, but I think I was the most excited about catching these and seeing these trout in the stream. So if you do come up, bring your fly rod with you, because we're seeing brook trout coming back in Cherry Run. Next. So the first impact of the property was of deep mining, which occurred from 1890s to, like I said, probably 1940s. after World War II and in the 1950s, larger equipment was developed larger earth moving equipment was developed, where we started to see strip mining. And this strip mining was probably occurred, this about the 1950s is when this occurred. There was no regulations for reclamation. So the result was, what was left behind was these big trenches and high walls. And here you can see a high wall that was left on the property, as well as some structure that was used for conveying the coal. Next. In addition, as they processed the coal, they left behind a lot of coal waste. This is called red dog for obvious reasons. It's actually been oxidized, so it's not reactive, but it looks pretty, so it's inert at this point, but it does look pretty awful. You can see how folks added their own decorations to it. And the issue with these old unreclaimed high walls, and as well as the coal waste, is that particularly high walls provided actually provided a hazard. These are cliffs that if you're walking through the forest and not aware that they're there and they're expecting a cliff, you could come up upon a cliff. So it could be quite dangerous. Plus, it also affected how the water would be running off the property. The water should, run off the surface, but with these high walls in place, it created a trench where the water would then infiltrate into the mines and then cause more acid mine drainage. So fixing this high wall improved its safety. It improved, got rid of this mine waste, and it also improved the drainage of the area. Again, fixing, in theory, it's not hard. All you're doing is moving earth, but it is pretty costly and takes a lot of effort. Next slide. So we're pleased that Department of Environmental Protection, through their Borough and Mine Reclamation, had funding to come in and perform this reclamation of the old high walls. You can see they were contoured back to original contour, improved drainage on it. Now we're draining it back into the stream. Next slide. This is another view of that reclamation. A lot of the red dog has been either buried, or here it's been piled up to what's called hummocky piles. One of our goals is we wanted to see this reforested, and you can't reforest in compacted soil. So these hummocky piles were left as loose soil. That then this was planted in trees back in April, so you can't see the trees, but this is actually planted. Trees are planted in this hummocky pile, and it'd be real interesting to see how well they grow. You might think they might not like it, but in fact, if you look at the unreclaimed high walls, yet had no problem growing trees. Trees don't mind growing this kind of loose acidic soils, particularly hardwoods that we have that's predominant on this property. So we'll come back here hopefully in a few years and see some nice trees starting to pop out here. Next. So after that strip mining in the 50s, the property was again strip mined in the 80s. This is probably in the late 70s or 80s. And this strip mining was, at this point, there is regulation in place how you reclaim strip mines, and it was reclaimed where we put back the contours. But the issue is, once it was reclaimed, the soil was compacted so much that nothing ever grew there. So again, the photo on the top right was taken about the time we bought the property, and the other photo on the bottom left was taken in 2012, about 10 years ago. And you can see even after 30 plus years after the strip mining took place or reclamation took place, you still had no trees. I also want to point out on that bottom left picture, that's where the village of Cardiff used to sit. That's why there's really no remains of that village, because it was the ground was owned by the coal company who then stripped it in the 70s or 80s. So our goal here was to get the forest back. Here, the land's been contoured correctly, so you're not, the runoff is correctly, but we really wanted to get the forest back where it used to be. So how do you do that? Next, you plow it up, right? So this case, we had a big dozer came in with a blade in the back that actually plowed up. This is about 30 acres of the reclaim of the strip mine that was plowed up. Next slide. And then once it was loosened soil, we could plant trees in it. We did this project in partnership with the American Chestnut Foundation. We planted about 30 acres, 20,000 trees, both with volunteers, and there was some professional planting. And the American Chestnut Foundation was interested in doing it not just to show how to reclaim old strip mines, but they also were interested in having a place to do some testing of their blight-resistant trees. So this project also included a fenced an acre of blight-resistant chestnuts that they planted as a progeny test. These trees are planted as nuts. This is back about 7 or 8 years ago. This is 2013 we did this planting. Next. And this was photos from last year. That's the chestnut orchard. Those trees are a little over 7 years old now. They're planted as nuts, so they're getting to a point where they're ready to starting to fruit. And you can see a pretty good survival of those chestnuts. You can also within the goldenrod, it's also full of trees now. It's hard to see them, particularly the locust tree on the very right. That was one of the trees that was planted. Locusts grow the fastest, so you're seeing the locusts pop up pretty quick. But if you look around, you'll find the oaks and the maples, and it's really exciting to see this area becoming reforested. And every year I go back, I'm just amazed how much better it's looking. So that was a really big effort trying to remediate from those past mines. It took a lot of years, and we're glad to really get to this point where that's complete. So feel free to explore on that side. The other goal, ongoing goal with the property is we're doing forest management on the property. We wanted to demonstrate good sustainable forest management. Our goal here, like a lot of forest land in this region, everything got cut over back in the late 1800s. So most forests really only have one age class. So there tends to be not a lot of structural diversity to these forests or age class diversity. So our goal is really to try to increase the structural and species diversity across the forest and to improve the habitat for forest dwelling species. And you can see this is some photos from some of our forest management up on the top right. That was a harvest we just did last year. On the bottom left, or on the middle left, I should say, is a harvest we did a few years ago. Then on the bottom, you can see the regeneration of the oaks. There's incredible regeneration on this property, which makes it really exciting to work doing some forest management on it. In addition to as a part of the forest management, we also have designated reserve areas. We have a Hemlock Reserve area. We have reserve area around our riparian areas, and then we have future old growth reserve area kind of in the middle of the property. So the idea on those reserve areas where we are not doing forest management, so we can again get that diversity of age classes and structure, and see the difference between, really demonstrate the difference between forest managed areas and areas that are not managed. We have done about 5 harvests since 2011, and the income of these harvests then get reinvested back in the management of the property, or we use it to do other land conservation in the region. Next. Now we're going to move to the western side, do a little hike. So here we are off 5 Points Road off the western part of the property with this parking area. Yeah, if you want to, it's a great place to come do a hike. You can park here in the parking area. You can see the hemlock tree. So we do have issues with illegal motorized use that we try to discourage on this property. So when this hemlock, and they were actually driving around this gate at one point. So when this hemlock came down, I was like, great, we're just going to leave it right where it is. And I'm not seeing any motorized use since then, since that hemlock came down. So from the gate, you can start walking up the hill. Next. At this point, you're in our Hemlock Reserve, and you see the hemlocks on both sides of the road. Again, this is one of our reserve areas where we're not going to be doing forest management. Next. It's a pretty steep walk as you get up there, so we located our first interpretive sign where we think people will be both out of breath and need a break anyway. So here you're kind of at the border. The reserve area is actually at your back, and here you're looking at out into some of the managed areas on the property. Next. Here you're almost to the top. Hopefully you're still maybe getting out of breath a little bit. Right now you're kind of coming out the hemlocks. You can see Hemlock Reserve area. You can see some of the hemlocks at the edge, but now we're moving more in the hardwood section that we are managing. Next. So now we're on top of the property. You're walking along pretty well. We're in our, this is the area that we do management for forests. Next. And we have this interpretive sign talking a bit how we're managing the forest. This is actually looking over a harvest we did a few years ago. Next. So you can continue your walk on top. Again, this is the management areas are on both sides of you. We did a harvest on the left side about a year ago. Next. And this is as you're walking along through the managed area. it's nice to be, this is a nice walk on top. You might also see some wildlife up through here. As I mentioned, in addition to deer and turkeys, certainly it would be surprised if you see an elk up here as well. Next. So at this point, you're starting to bear to the right, starting to loop into our reserve area, what we're calling our old growth reserve area. Next. So at this point, we're in our reserve area, and this reserve area is hardwoods. It's a lot of the hardwoods. This is a northern hardwood forest on the property. There's a lot of red oak is a primary component, as well as there's some chestnut oak. You find beech, sugar maple, soft maple. So good diverse species of trees. Again, we want to get that diversity a little bit more in our managed areas. But here in our reserve area, we'll let it become more old growth conditions and hopefully provide habitat for additional wildlife. Next. We're continuing to walk through the old growth area, through our reserve area. Next. And this is a view looking down into the reserve area from the trail. The reserve area is kind of a hollow in the middle of the property, and we're looking down that hollow, and you can see how it looks. Again, it looks a lot like the vantage areas for now, but it'll be real interesting as time continues how this will develop. Next. So at this point, we completed our loop, and we're on the trail back to our car. So it's all downhill from here. So hopefully you might have seen some good wildlife as you came through here. You got a chance to see some forest management as some of our reserve areas as well. This is a great property to explore. This trail, we also use a lot of this trail for forest management as well. So it's a very stabilized road. So in addition to hiking, we do allow bicycling on this trail. This property is also open to primitive camping. It's a good property to hunt. So there's deer and turkey and even elk in the property if you're lucky enough to get an elk tag. Now with our reclaimed acid mine drainage project, you can come up with your fly rod, do some fishing and chariot run. Also, the property does have some frontage along the Bennett Branch itself, and we have a canoe access on the Bennett Branch too. So come up and explore. It's a great property, and I'm glad I'm able to manage it, and I love visiting it. So with this, we'll turn it over to Matt.
Hi, everyone. I'm just going to go over a few different ways you can get involved. Next. As a stewardship team, there's only 4 of us, and there's thousands of acres to manage and conserve. So we highly depend on our volunteers. They are the backbone of this program, and we can't do it without them. This is a cleanup at one of our preserves. Sometimes we acquire land with historic dumps. Sometimes there's illegal dumping on our properties, and we want to make sure that we, get that up, make sure it's pristine for our visitors and the wildlife and other plant species. Next. We also do trail work. This is at Tom's Run. They are actually building the trail, so they're clearing the trail out before someone comes in and digs the tread. We'll do a variety of trail maintenance and building, whether it's rock work, removing vegetation, or resurfacing the tread. We need volunteers for that constantly, and it's great to have them around. We wouldn't have the trails that we do without our volunteers, and it's a great opportunity to come out and learn what it means to build sustainable trails, because here at the Conservancy, we want to have these sustainable trails so that they last a long time, and it provides a better experience for our visitors. Next. We also will do invasive removal. This is another shot of removing garlic mustard at Wolf Creek Narrows. We do this to promote native biodiversity within our preserves and provide a better environment for our native plant and animal species. Next. This is a volunteer event with one of our volunteers, Alan, checking the tree tubes. And we want to do this in case the trees get too big. We want to see what numbers we have of tree success rate. after the planting. These are just a variety of volunteer events that you can get involved in. We usually have monthly Saturday volunteer events across our preserves, and sometimes we'll have occasional volunteer events during the week. It's usually through March and November. And I'll explain more how you can get involved in volunteering later. Next. These are going to be shots of a few before and after projects that our stewardship team did. This is out at Tom's Run to create a universal access trail. And this creates easier access to the stream, and there's some picnic tables right from the parking area. And one thing that really helped fund this next, we had a little campaign for Tom's Run, and this is what it looks like now. We put in a new kiosk, and it's easier to walk around and enjoy the trail. Next. This is at Lake Pleasant. This is a house that we removed along with its septic tank. This is the before. Next. And this is the after. This will improve the stream bank, and we hope to have this regrow in, and closing that septic tank, removes any hazards that may associate with that and the lake. Next. So this summer and fall, we were undertaking the 41 Places campaign to raise funds specifically to take care of our preserves. We have about 41 places in which you can go out and enjoy. And we want to spread the word that managing these places doesn't just happen. It takes considerable time and financial resources. Next. You may have seen in the past month these signs. We put them at many of our preserves. In addition to the project we described earlier, shoreline restoration at Lake Pleasant and parking improvements at Wolf Creek Narrows and Plain Grove Fens, here are a couple other projects we hope to complete as a result of this campaign. This is back in my area that I manage, is Whites Creek Valley Natural Area. It consists of 85 acres in Somerset Township or Somerset County and Addison Township. The preserve features a hemlock and mixed northern hardwood forest, and it provides access to a very popular trout stream, Whites Creek. Next. Here we have unimproved pull-off access, a little parking area along the road. Unfortunately, it's in poor condition, and we're seeing runoff from the road go into the stream. We like to regrade this and put down some crushed stone, and even remove some 8 dead ash trees around the parking area to make it safer. I've even gotten my car stuck in the mud at this parking area. So to prevent that, we'd love to improve it and make it a better experience for our visitors. Next. This is Seidling Hill Creek Conservation Area. This is over 375 acres in Bedford and Fulton counties, right along Seidling Hill Creek. It creates a unique Appalachian shale barrens, and that supports 12 species of special concern. Seidling Hill Creek itself hosts rare freshwater mussels and freshwater sponge. Next. This is another house that we acquired in the acquisition, and similar to Lake Pleasant, it is a structure we would like to remove. Close off the septic tank, get rid of the house and the septic tank and the garage. And this is right along the stream, so we'd love to, maintain that stream bank by growing in those native species, and it's another access point to the creek for our visitors. Next slide. And, you know, there's plenty of beauty and unique features to all of our preserves. And another way you can just get involved is by visiting our preserves. They're a great place to relax and enjoy nature. If you ever see a stewardship staff out there, please say hello. You know, you can hunt, fish, and hike at a majority of our preserves. And we'd love to see you out there, and tell all your friends. Next. Another way you can get involved is by becoming a member. We are a member-supported nonprofit, so your contributions have really helped us do a lot of projects within stewardship, and we'd love to see that continued effort. Next slide. Again, you can always become a volunteer. One of the easiest ways is to get on our email list. Just contact Andy Zadnik, azadnik@paconserve.org. He'll get you right on the list, and you'll get monthly emails, or even more, because we'll have in the week events. Like I said, we have at least a Saturday event every month between March and November. Some weekdays, they're usually from about 9 to 2, and they're all across Western Pennsylvania. So we'd love for you to come out there. It's great to meet new people, learn a little bit more about what we do, and it's a great time. Next. So, like I said, we have these 41 places. So another way you can get involved is by donating to the 41 Places Nature Near You Needs You campaign. Keeping our preserves wild and natural and adding improvements to make them welcoming for all of you takes hard work and resources. I hope you can make a special gift today by visiting our website. Next. You'll find this campaign right on the front of our website at waterlandlife.org. On our website, you'll also find more information about all of our preserves, more opportunities to volunteer, and other programs within the Conservancy. Next. Thank you.
Thanks, Amelia, and thank you, Matt and Tyson. That was terrific. I'm going to turn this back over to Carmen. Hopefully we'll take a few minutes at least to answer some questions that folks may have posted to the Q&A. And while we're doing that, I've got just a few more images of some folks out enjoying our properties. So I'll just kind of scroll through some of those while Carmen takes over. Thanks all.
Hey, thank you, everybody. I'm Carmen Bray, Director of Communications for the Conservancy. Great information, great presentation, everybody. You guys gave me some great places and ideas to go hiking this weekend after the rain and after it dries out. So thank you for that. I hope everyone else got a chance to enjoy that. So thanks for the questions we have so far. We have a few minutes, and hopefully we'll be able to quickly get through these 2 questions here. We have one from Randy, and this is a question maybe for Tyson to answer. He asks, your land outside of Cambridge Springs on Mystic Road near the intersection of Route 6, are there any projects needing to be done since our planting of trees some years ago?
Thanks, Carmen, and thanks, Randy, for the question. So that's part of our Mystic Valley Conservation Area, and that conservation area is currently comprised of 2 separate parcels. They're not contiguous. That northern parcel that you're referring to is subject to a life estate, meaning that we purchased the property, but the previous landowner is able to live there until they surrender the estate, and then we would take over full control. So currently that particular parcel is not open to public access. However, the southernmost parcel, which is on Pinewoods Road, just over the Crawford County line, that one's about 66 acres, and it's open to hunting, fishing, hiking, and the same other activities as our other preserves. So on that property, you're welcome to go out and recreate. In terms of projects, it has road frontage on both sides of Pinewoods Road, so we're always looking for someone to help us keep trash picked up along there. There's also a property just to the north of the one you mentioned on, I believe it's Flats Road. It's our Wheelertown Flats Nature Preserve, right along French Creek. Again, road frontage, trash is an issue there if you want to help out with help keeping that property tidy. So thank you.
Thanks, Tyson. Here's another question. This is from Anne, who asks and says, thank you for all the work that we do in addition to our volunteers. It's a question about funding, and I'm going to pitch this question to Andy. Andy, she's asking related to funding and if we've ever applied for land water conservation fund funding from the federal level.
We have not. The government funding that we've applied for is primarily through the state, the C2P2 grants, conservation partnership grants that are handled through DCNR. And of course, I don't know, DCNR, the state, may actually get land and water conservation fund money from the federal government, but projects that we've funded have some of that money has come from the state itself. Hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Andy. And I'm going to stick with you for this next question as well. It's from someone who's asking related to the removal of invasive plants when we do that removal from our preserves. How and where do we dispose of them?
Well, as you saw in that one shot of the garlic mustard, we have to bag that, because if you pull garlic mustard, is easy to pull out of the ground, especially when the ground is wet. But if you are a little bit late, garlic mustard will actually continue to grow. If I was to pull it out and just leave it on the ground, it'll actually keep growing and will actually go all the way to flower and seed. So the garlic mustard we have to pull and remove. So at the end of those work days, we usually divvy up the garbage bags full of garlic mustard and we each get to take one home. Some of the other invasives we can leave on the ground. Certainly, whatever we spray or have sprayed, we'll just leave that as it is. Let's see, purple loosestrife is something else that we actually clip the seed heads off, and we do bag that as well and try to get that off the site. Let's see, the trees, like tree of heaven, if you have to spray a tree of heaven, obviously that stays. We've also treated Eurasian water milfoil. Well, we treat the water body and just let it die and decompose there. Hope that answers the question.
Great, thank you, Andy. We have, let me see, one more, just saying a thank you for that answer. I think that concludes kind of our questions and answers for today. We're a little over time. Just wanted to echo everyone's thanks for attending today. And this webinar is being recorded and has been recorded, will be available on our website in a few days. Everyone who's on the webinar today, in addition to everyone else who registered, will get an email whenever that's up on our website. If you have any additional questions, feel free to send us an email at info@paconserve.org, and we'll get back to you with an answer to your question. Andy, would you like to close us out today?
With a shot of some kids. Mine is in there along with one of our scientists, Ephraim Zerman's kids are there as well. Thank you all. We really appreciate it. We appreciate all the support. Please donate if you can, coming out to a work day, and just really get out there and spend some time on our preserves and let us know what you see, the good and the bad. We want to know what's out there. We don't get out there that often. So if you see something cool or something that we need to be made aware of, give me a call, drop me an email, contact Matt, Tyson, or Amelia. And again, thank you so much.